It was the height of World War II, and Private John Smith had just been captured by the enemy. He was a young American soldier, barely out of his teens, and he had been sent to fight in Europe with the 101st Airborne Division. But now he was a prisoner of war, held captive by the Germans in a secret facility deep in the heart of the Black Forest. At first, John had been hopeful that he would be treated fairly as a prisoner of war. But that hope quickly faded as he was subjected to brutal interrogations and torture. The Germans were determined to extract as much information as they could from him, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to do so. But it wasn't just torture that John was subjected to. Soon he realized that he was being used as a test subject in a top-secret experiment. The Germans had developed a new drug that they believed could enhance the soldiers' abilities, making them stronger, faster, and more resilient to injury. And John was the perfect candidate to test it on. At first, John was hesitant to participate in the experiment. He had heard rumors about the horrific things that the Germans did to their prisoners, and he was afraid of what they might do to him. But the Germans were persuasive, and they promised him that if he cooperated, he would be treated well and might even be released. So John agreed to participate in the experiment. He was injected with the experimental drug, and soon he began to feel its effects. His senses became heightened, his reflexes became faster, and he felt an almost superhuman strength coursing through his veins. At first, John was thrilled with his newfound abilities. He was able to escape from his cell and evade the guards, using his enhanced senses to anticipate their every move. But soon, he realized that there was a price to pay for his enhanced abilities. The drug had side effects that the Germans hadn't anticipated. John began to experience intense hallucinations, seeing things that weren't there and hearing voices in his head. He also became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the Germans were plotting against him and that everyone around him was a potential enemy. As the days went by, John's condition deteriorated. He became increasingly unstable, lashing out at anyone who came near him and becoming increasingly violent. The Germans realized that they had made a terrible mistake in experimenting on him, but it was too late to reverse the effects of the drug. One night, John's paranoia reached a fever pitch. He was convinced that the Germans were coming to take him away and that he needed to escape at all costs. He broke out of his cell and began to run through the facility, taking down anyone who got in his way with his superhuman strength. As he ran, John realized that something was terribly wrong. The facility was unlike anything he had ever seen before, with strange symbols etched into the walls and strange machines that hummed with an otherworldly energy. It was like something out of a nightmare, and John realized that he was trapped in a living hell. But it wasn't just the facility that was strange. John realized that he was changing, becoming something that was no longer human. His skin began to peel away, revealing a new layer of skin underneath. His eyes turned a deep red, and his teeth became razor-sharp fangs. He was no longer John Smith, the American soldier. He was something else entirely. As he roamed through the facility, John began to encounter other creatures like himself. They were the results of the same experiments that he had been subjected to, and they were just as monstrous as he was. They attacked him on sight, driven mad by the effects of the drug. In the end, John was forced to fight his way through the facility, using his enhanced abilities and newfound strength to take down his fellow creatures. But the more he fought, the more he realized that he was no longer fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for his very survival. As John made his way deeper into the facility, he began to uncover the truth about what the Germans had been doing. They had been experimenting with a drug that they believed would create the ultimate soldier. But the drug had unintended consequences. It had turned the test subjects into monsters, creatures that were no longer human. John realized that he was the only one left alive. The other creatures had been killed by the Germans or had died in their cells, but he had somehow managed to survive. He was a monster, but he was still alive. As he reached the heart of the facility, John came face to face with the man behind the experiments. He was a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair and a cold, calculating gaze. He introduced himself as Dr. Klaus Werner, and he explained to John that he had been experimenting with the drug for years, trying to perfect it. But the drug had taken on a life of its own, and now it was out of his control. The creatures that it had created were running rampant through the facility, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Dr. Werner offered John a way out. He told him that if he cooperated with him, he would give him the antidote that would turn him back into a human. John hesitated, unsure if he could trust the man who had turned him into a monster. But he knew that he had no other choice. Dr. Werner led John to a laboratory where he began to mix together various chemicals, trying to create the antidote. But as he worked, John realized that there was something else in the room with them. Something that Dr. Werner hadn't anticipated. The creature was unlike anything John had ever seen before. It was massive, with tentacle-like arms that writhed and twisted as it moved. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly energy, and it emitted a low hum that made the hair on the back of John's neck stand up. Dr. Werner tried to stop the creature, but it was too late. It attacked him with its tentacles, and pulled him into its open mouth. John realized he was next, but refused to die without a fight. He grabbed a nearby beaker and hit the creature on the head, causing it to stagger. Taking advantage of the creature's momentary weakness, John lunged at it and bit it with his razor-sharp teeth. The creature howled in pain, and John knew he had to finish it off before it had a chance to recover. Using all his strength, he sank his teeth deep into the creature's neck, grabbed its throat, and killed it instantly. As the creature fell to the ground, John realized that he had become something else entirely. He was no longer just a monster or a soldier. He was a survivor. He turned to Dr. Werner, who was lying on the ground, bleeding from his wounds. John knew that he could end his suffering with a single blow, but he hesitated. He realized that killing Dr. Werner wouldn't bring back the other test subjects or undo the horrors that had been done to him. Instead, John grabbed the antidote and injected it into his own veins. He felt a surge of energy as the drug began to work, reversing the effects of the experimental drug and turning him back into a human. As he stood up, John realized that he was free. He had survived the horrors of the Black Forest and had a chance to start a new life. He knew that he would never forget what had happened to him, but he also knew that he couldn't let it define him. John made his way out of the facility and into the open air. The sun was shining and the birds were singing, and for the first time in a long time, John felt alive. He didn't know where he was going or what he was going to do next, but he knew that he had a second chance, and he was going to make the most of it. Years went by, and John never spoke of his experiences in the Black Forest to anyone. He moved to America, changed his name, and started a new life. He got a job, made friends, and even fell in love. But there were still nights when he would wake up screaming, reliving the horrors of his past. There were times when he would look in the mirror and see the monster staring back at him. But every time he felt himself slipping back into that darkness, he would remember that he was a survivor. He had overcome the worst that humanity had to offer, and he would never let it defeat him again. John passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his loved ones. His story was never told, but his legacy lived on. He was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still hope. That even in the face of unspeakable horrors, there was still a chance for redemption. And for those who knew him, John was a hero. Not just because of what he had endured, but because of who he had become. A man who had faced his demons and emerged victorious. A man who had fought for his freedom and won. A man who had been subjected to the worst of humanity, but had never lost his humanity. John's story may never be told, but it will never be forgotten. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light to be found. If you like my story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for more and similar stories. See you.